Irreverent, entertaining, cool. You're listening to LA Talk Radio.
You're listening to Get Yourself the Job with Jennifer Hill and Brandon Maslan, only on LA Talk Radio.
Happy belated Thanksgiving to those of you tuning in the United States, and to the rest of you in the world from wherever and whenever you're tuning in. Thank you so much for being here with us on Get Yourself the Job on LA Talk Radio. I'm Jennifer K. Hill, and you are here with myself, my incredible co-host Brandon Maslan, and Catrice Monson. And before we jump into today's show and tell you about our incredible guest and dive into yet another episode as we've been doing all month on D&I, diversity and inclusion, I'd like to first take a moment and thank our sponsors, the people over at Markham Search LLC. They offer premier professional recruiting services throughout the United States, including temporary services, payrolling services, as well as permanent placement. So please do keep them in mind for all of your staffing needs. And without further ado, Brandon, I turn it over to you, my friend.
Thank you, my friend. And I hope Portugal is as amazing as ever. So it's just fun to say Portugal. So let's see. This is my distinct honor and privilege to introduce someone who I think the world of, both as a person and a professional. In my business, especially as a coach and a corporate training specialist and as a feminist, I meet a lot of people over the years, probably thousands, and there's just a few where there's that instantaneous connection. But in Catrice's, as I introduced Catrice, I want to say that one thing she did really early on was she invited me to a screening of, I think it was the Obama film at CBSI in New York, in San Francisco, and really not only just reached out, but made an effort. And that means a lot to me because I spent a lot of my career reaching out to others. And it always means the world to me when people do the same for me. And Catrice is one of those people. Patty Dingle, who we had on a couple weeks ago, has done the same thing for me time and again. So Catrice is the co-founder and managing director at Right Size Media. She'll tell you what they do. Right now, they're actually helping one of my favorite companies on earth, Transcendence Theater, level up and find out how to better connect with their audience and their cast members. And I just think she's doing wonderful work. And that really ties into just the theater with the entertainment background that she has, having been the senior vice president of corporate diversity and inclusion at my wife's old company, CBS. I've spent many days at the CBS in the studios. And then finally, senior vice president of labor relations before that, which ties into her background. I don't know if you're a recovering lawyer. She probably still has a hand in it. I'm more of a recovering, but she is a part-time professor at University of California School of Law as well. So without further ado, Catrice, thank you so much for joining us today. We're going to focus again, as always, on how people can get their dream job, stay in that dream job, or just be better leaders and rise in their careers. And I'd love for you to talk about, let's start in the present. Talk to us about what Right Size Media does and how it helps companies and individuals.
So thank you, Jennifer and Brandon, actually, for having me here today. I'm really excited. I love your conversation. I love what you all are talking about on this show. Particularly love the diversity and inclusion aspect, of course, but what you do just regularly. I love that topic, or all of those topics. So thank you for having me. So that brings us to today and what I am doing currently. So me and my partner are working every day in the diversity, equity, and inclusion space. We started our company earlier this year, Right Size Media. A funny story is we actually came up with the name. We were on a plane, and you know how best things happen. Your mind starts going when you're on planes and in the shower and in your car. I feel like those are the areas. So we came up with Right Size Media, and we really wanted to get on the conversation about diversity, equity, inclusion, particularly in the entertainment media and tech space. And that's what we've been doing. So we work with studios, shows on the scripted and unscripted side, unions. We've tapped into a little bit of the health and wellness industry, so that's been kind of new and interesting to us. But our sweet spot, I think, is really entertainment, media, and tech. And part of it for both of us is that these are areas that have so much of an impact on all of our lives on a daily basis. And when we talk about one of my favorite topics, which is unconscious bias, the media, the imagery, all of that we see, whether we're consuming it on television, in a feature film, through print, whatever it looks like, it has such an impact on those biases that we create and, have in our lives. So I could go on talking about all of that forever, but yeah, so that's what we're doing right now.
Catrice, I love this. I mean, the idea of unconscious bias is something that is so mind-blowing because you don't even realize. That's the thing about it being unconscious. I'm a huge proponent of awareness and consciousness, and how in anything, whether we're talking about diversity in the workplace or being a human being, living the best life that you possibly can, it all begins and ends with consciousness and awareness. So how can one of us as a human being who's out there, and clearly we're unconscious about our biases, how can we begin to identify those and illuminate them by bringing them to the forefront of our minds so that they're no longer unconscious and we can begin to make conscientious choices about it?
So love that question, love that topic. One of the things that we do a lot of is go into organizations and really talk about the things that you just mentioned. So making people more aware of these biases that we have. I was one of those people 5-6 years ago before I really delved into it. I would have been one of those people that says, I don't really have bias. I'm not really prejudiced, all of those things. But the reality is we all have it. And we all fall prey to it. So like you said, how do we disrupt it? You're going to do it. So what do you need? You need people in your life who are going to hold you accountable. You need to have common language within your organizations, within your, personal and professional lives to say, oh, that's status quo bias, or that's the halo and horns effect that's happening. So you build teams, you create environments with people who have the same language.
I have to stop you there for a moment, Catrice. I like to tap into what our listeners are thinking, and they're like, what did she just say about
Right.
sports? Status quo, I think we can all kind of wrap our heads around, but if you could just share what both of those are as you continue down this road, just so we are all kind of understanding where you're coming from, because I'm fascinated.
And thank you. Please do stop me because I live and breathe and I'm in this world and get excited about it. So I talk.
And actually, that's a good point, Catrice. Let's bring it back to the very beginning because not everyone is familiar with that term, unconscious bias. Obviously, you and I are. Could you start there and then go for the audience on what unconscious bias is defined as or what it is?
Yeah, it's really the shortcuts that our brain makes. It's the preconceived notions that we have, assumptions that we make about people, experiences. And it's really, they're created because of our childhood, our lived experience, what we've been exposed to, our families, all of these different things create those biases for us. And it was really designed, to protect us in many ways when you go back to our ancestry and our ancestors and like who you knew was friend and foe kind of thing. And the problem that we have now is that we apply those biases to people. And so you have to be careful of that because you're making assumptions. You're using stereotype maybe to apply it to people that you're meeting for the first time. So that's where you have to disrupt it. That's where we say you have to slow down. You have to have accountability. You have to have a language that you can talk about with people to say, like I said, that halo bias, which I'll get back to, which is where, somebody in your life does something amazing. They have a really positive trait that you sort of resonate or identify with. Well, you literally create this halo over them and you can see they can do no wrong and you see no wrong in them. So you give them advantage, you treat them in a better way than maybe you would others that don't have that same halo over them. And the horns effect is the opposite, really, where there's a negative trait where they do something wrong, they make one bad decision or error, and you forever sort of put them in the corner and don't give them an opportunity to sort of come out of that error or mistake. So just a little preview as to what we do on a regular basis in some of our workshops.
I love that, Catrice. And I just want to jump in here for a second for two reasons. One is to thank all of our viewers online streaming with us on Facebook Live. Of course, many of you might be listening to this on iTunes after the fact or elsewhere, but we just want you to know you can also chime in. You know, we had Reg just said, thanks so much. Accountability is so important, Catrice, and she's glad that you brought that up. And the thing I wanted to highlight, though, for everybody out there is the idea of filters. I don't know if anybody's ever thought of this, but we inadvertently put filters, these unconscious biases. Even if it's good, you think, oh, that can't be a bad thing that I'm seeing this person in a positive light. But if that's the only way you can see them, you might get bitten by that because you're not seeing, and you're also not going to help them grow. If you're collaborating, you might see them through this lens of, oh, they're perfect and can do no wrong. And then years later, it creates an unhealthy balance in the relationship and vice versa. I've been, unfortunately, one of the people to put a horns bias on somebody I've worked with. And it creates disharmony and disunity, not just between you and the other person, but it has a trickle down effect to everybody else in the organization. They can sense it. So I think that idea that you just highlighted right there, Catrice, about filters and perspectives, horns, halos, whatever it might be, is so critical. And Brandon, I hand it over back to you.
No, and I can listen to you and Catrice go back and forth all day. Catrice, actually, one thing, and you are closing out Diversity Month, although in my work in particular, and I hope for the rest of everyone's work, diversity, inclusion, and belonging is year-long work. It is never ending, 365 days a year. It should be all of our work. And it really has an impact. And I think this year, as it has shown a light on so many things, has shown a light that it should be ongoing and consistent. So one thing that makes me think about that is, how are companies that you've seen, entertainment or otherwise, shifting? And one thing I'm interested in is, where does it benefit someone or harm someone to not be aware of their unconscious bias or otherwise in getting the job, keeping the job, or being a great leader? What is the positive impact, or what is the negative?
Yeah, so the first part of your question on, working with organizations and companies and how it's shifting. I mean, I will say that I feel like many of our clients, what they're asking for and what we certainly recommend is sustainable, long-term initiatives, goals, focus. So much more, I think, than I have seen in a really long time is that sustainability. So really looking at things that, what are you implementing? What are you doing? And what are you committing to over 30 days, 90 days, 6 months, a year, 2 years, so that, and putting accountability measures in place. People going out, for years, companies have definitely gone out and put out stats and things like that. But then, okay, here are our stats, and what are we going to do to change them? And what are the goals around that? And who within the organization is holding folks accountable? So it's not just, I love what you talked about a little bit, Brandon. You said, embedding things in organizations too. This is not just about a month or, a period of time that we're going to focus on this. This is about, what are we putting in the infrastructure into organizations to create this long-term sustainable, and I will say those words over and over again, kind of change that we all want to see. And then your piece about, looking at bias or how it impacts, I think, at all of those different sort of levels or areas where you're talking about being a great leader. I mean, one of the things we talk about, you probably have the term inclusive leadership, right? What does that look like? And so much of that, and I think it could go to any person, a colleague, peer, leader, saying you don't know, saying you're not an expert, which most of us aren't comfortable doing, right? Saying that I still need to learn more, not making it other people's responsibility, but saying that you're going to take on the responsibility to learn, to grow in this area. And being quiet sometimes and just listening, which also is hard for a lot of us, I think, but that's part of being an inclusive leader, mentor, ally. And then where can you speak up on other people's behalf when those situations where, bias is happening and you witness it, instead of being passive to it and being like, oh, I didn't do that, or I'm not saying something that is necessarily creating a microaggression, which we can talk about later, or there's an instance of bias, but how can you step up in that moment in a staff meeting, seeing something that's happening and speak up on somebody else's behalf? So, that I think, is part of disrupting bias and creating that more inclusive environment.
I have to say something really funny on a spiritual note here. I love spirituality. I love to meditate and I love to do all this. I have a little secret to winning at the game of life. If you want to have miracles, happiness, abundance, fulfillment, your soulmate, your dream job, you name it, the secret is to do what Catrice just said. Do the thing that is the most challenging thing for you in the moment. Go against your selfish nature. Go against that protective nature to desire to, like, oh gosh, I can't stick my head out. What if, God forbid something happens, or, somebody doesn't like what I say? It is in those moments where we confront our greatest fears, where we do the thing that is for the greater good, that it's for the sake of sharing and the betterment of humanity and the person in the meeting, and future people in those meetings. At those moments where we say the hardest thing, we risk looking bad. On the other side of that is the miracle you've always been waiting for. And that's just one of my favorite messages I've heard from a lot of my teachers over the years. And I've personally experienced it. When you pause and you don't react and you say, what is in the highest and best good? How could I help move this conversation forward? Is what I'm about to say going to cause heart hurt, or is it going to help to elevate people in this room and future people in this room? When you ask yourself these questions, it becomes transformative, not only for you, but for all the future you sitting in that seat.
Jennifer, that's actually perfect, because that's something that I've learned from my diversity leaders, first and foremost, the heads of D&I at so many companies, and then brought it forth of, the old version of being a leader is like executive presence and be the leader in the room. I think the new version is what I sort of crafted last year and we continue to craft, which is authentic leadership, which is have your core values, be consistent, but think of the best interest of the collective, especially when it's easier not to, or not even your best interest. The best interest of the collective was what matters. You touched on authenticity too, which Catrice has in spades and then. And I love the idea of authenticity to that point. Why is it hard? Because when you do it well, some people like you. When you do it great, some people love you. When you do it absolutely perfect, some people hate you. And very few of us are willing to be hated by a few. So we risk being loved by many. And I think everyone from MLK to Gloria Steinem to Gandhi, risk being hated so that they could help the collective. And I think that's where really amazing work can happen. Catrice, in your work, one thing you touched on, and I love this, is why entertainment means so much to you. And you mentioned the helping the companies, but also the importance of what they're putting out in the world. Can you talk about that sort of, I don't want to call it a battleground, but where you focus your energy, and why is it so important to focus on entertainment around this work?
So I love it because it's, been sort of my career, whether it was in labor relations or in diversity and inclusion for the last 20 years. But I do feel like there's a power in it, and it has so much impact, and it's so far reaching. So whether it's the storytelling that creators and writers get to create these amazing stories that, can represent so many different people from all over the globe, there's so much power in that. And the reach is so great. So that part I really do love. And then, that idea of when you're from a young age, that you see people that look like you, that are talking like you, or that you just resonate with for one reason or another. Again, the power in that is so great. So that's why I feel like media and entertainment can do so much. And then the behind the scenes part, the behind the camera, is where so much of that work really starts. So whether, you see it in the cast, you see it in the crew, you see it in the showrunners and the producers and all of that. I mean, I just feel like there's just so much opportunity there. And so part of our work definitely is on the storytelling piece, but it's also recognizing there's some amazing jobs behind the camera, which has always been really near and dear to me, even in labor relations, because getting more access and exposure to folks to know about those amazing jobs, what we call below the line. So the crew, right? That's another world and opportunity that we're working with some of the true locals on getting more exposure to make sure people know that those jobs exist, and getting more access there. So there's just so many aspects within the entertainment that, the diversity, equity, inclusion work can be impactful and really powerful.
Yeah, I think a great example of this is when you have somebody who has a voice to an entertainment. You can do work with one person, and yes, one of us can make a difference. It doesn't matter who you are. The woman in Georgia who got 800,000 people to vote, great example, like so powerful. And then you also have the Oprahs of the world, where yes, okay, somebody can be a figurehead, but what are you using that for? What do you use your voice for? And the people, whether they're behind the camera or in front of the camera, they have a capacity to touch so many lives, with their thoughts, their actions. And how do we capitalize on that and realize that we all have a voice and make sure each one of our voices is heard and honored and respected?
She brings up a good point there, Catrice, too, with entertainment, having worked in that industry and my wife having too. There's big personalities in entertainment. And I think hashtag things and I guess everyone else does. How do you make your voice heard in that industry around this work, knowing that there are, you mentioned that you have to be humble and have awareness. These are not always the things that in any industry people have. But what I'd love to know is, how do people make themselves, their voices heard? Really in entertainment, but it could be finance, it could be anything where there's big personalities. And how do we make sure what matters in this work is being listened to?
Well, what's really amazing, I think, what we are seeing really right now is that, like I said, so working, with at sort of different areas and different aspects of the industry, people, like you said, Jennifer, it only takes one. So you, who has a certain skill, whatever it looks like, on a particular show, you can be that mentor. You can reach out, you can go to high schools, you can go to elementary schools, and you can talk about the type of work that you do and bring that skill set to them so they can see, like, oh, this is an option and an opportunity, as well as the person who is a showrunner, a writer, an actor, a director who is more seen or visible. But what it is, it comes down to, and this goes back to sort of my upbringing and my family, it only takes one, right? As long as each of us are doing what we can and what we have to offer, we all have something unique to offer. So if each of us sort of look around, whatever industry we're in, but particularly in this one, and say, like, this is my unique piece. This is what I can speak about. This is what I can talk about. This is what I can offer to that next DEI lawyer, whoever it's going to be person. So it's every one of us can do something on a regular basis. And I feel like that's what we're seeing a lot. People are so willing to share what they have, that uniqueness about them. And I think the entertainment industry is really, stepping up at this moment, I think, to do that in so many areas. We can, community partners that we have, advocacy groups, entertainment companies are sort of saying, what can we do to contribute to this conversation, to see that sustainable long-term change? So the power of one is a big one.
You just reminded me, Catrice, of one of the most touching things that I remember happening when I was younger and living in LA. A friend of mine worked at a charter school where kids would come from all different communities, very, multi-diversal, a group that would come together at the school. And every year I would be invited to speak at the school to kids about their future, because I had owned a recruiting company. And I'll never forget, I was in a room of about maybe 30 kids, and I was talking about how you can be or do anything you want with life. And this kid kind of tentatively raised his hand and he said, Miss Hill, can you say that again? I don't think I understand. And I said, well, you can be or do anything. And he said, Miss Hill, nobody's ever told me that before. And my heart just break. And that's, I love what you just brought up, Catrice, because you never know how and where. You might not go and speak at a school, but you You might be talking to your friends' teenage kids at, you know, or your own kids or nephews or friends of friends, and you might not realize that the words you say and how you speak and how you give everybody access, no matter who you are, to fulfilling their dreams and to living a life. Like, I will always remember that young man for the rest of my life, and just the fact that nobody had ever told him that before. So if we learn to use our words to uplift, inspire, and empower, miracles can happen in all of our lives. And around the holidays, you know, whether you're Zooming with family or if you are able to be in the same room, just remember, use your words to create and uplift.
Well, you bring up an interesting point around unconscious bias, Jennifer, there, which I love. Sarah Silverman has this thing where she talks about how please don't go up to a little girl and say, you can be whatever you want. You can be president, because it never occurred to her that she couldn't be. And now you just planted that in her head. And I think that's where I love the work that Catrice says. I love the idea of, even in helping, we are creating bias, unconscious bias on a poor child. And so these things, even in service to help, we do unintentional harm. I mean, one of my favorite things I've learned in this work is your intent might be beautiful, but your impact is very bad. And you need to be aware of your impact. Catrice, can you talk about what your work's done for individuals? Thank you, Jennifer, because I think that really is these beautiful two sides of those coins. Catrice, what is the impact you're seeing? What's going on in the landscape? What's going on with your,
Well, I love that you talked about intent versus impact. Again, one of my favorite topics, and one that we spend quite a bit of time on in our workshops. And my partner, it's one of his favorite areas to talk about in the sessions, but it is true. I mean, we as human beings want to focus on our intent, right? We want to go immediate, especially when we offend or insult unintentionally. We want to go to, oh, I didn't mean that, or, oh, I didn't intend it. But the reality is, particularly in this space that we are working in on a regular basis, we are constantly having conversations with people about the impact. And letting people have the time and space. When somebody has the courage in many instances to step forward and say, oh, what just happened in that meeting or in that particular instance landed on me in this way and had this impact. Many times it's scary for somebody to do. And so then we really encourage, like, the human instinct is to go and say, oh, I'm so sorry for saying that. I didn't mean it. Da, 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 da. So what are you doing? In that moment, you're actually focusing on yourself, not so much focusing on the other person and giving them that space. So we encourage people to, like, say, I'm sorry, and let it sit, right? And give the person that space to absorb that, feel that, be recognized. And I'll tell you, one of the funniest things in doing this work, or just things that I've noted, is that it's like people say, we say I'm sorry, easy to say and hard to do. And I will tell you, in your personal and professional life, getting to I'm sorry is really helpful, right?
Oh man, I think coming off of Thanksgiving, a lot of us can appreciate that one. Oh my God, I love that. That was actually, I practiced law. We're both, I call myself a recovering lawyer, but I practiced law, and one of my first jobs was medical malpractice, and I met a guy, Dr. Lawyer was his name, which is a great name for a doctor. Never been sued, but one of the things that he did, that he practiced the art of, is the thing that for decades they said lawyers should never do, or doctors should never apologize, because once you apologize, it's an admission of guilt. And what they have now started teaching medical students, apologize. You don't, they may not be educated. They may not be educated, especially in the way that you are as a doctor, but they know you messed up. And if you come to them and say, I messed up and I'm sorry, it's something like 70 or 77% of the likelihood of being sued goes down, with the simple admission of guilt of I messed up and I'm going to, what's the next thing, right? And I'm going to do what I need to do to make it right. I assume that's, where does that play in, right? Because I love what you're talking about. I really do. That power of I'm sorry. Where does how does, instead of like, oh, defensive, how does someone reconcile? How do they take positive steps once they've had a negative impact?
Yeah. And I mean, a part of this, we say this is an art, not a science, right? So depending on your relationship, depending on whether it's a personal one or professional one, how long have you known the person? Is it a complete stranger? So the getting to I'm sorry fairly quickly allows, it may be that 10 minutes later, you can get into a dialogue and conversation with the person to sort of uncover what happened, how to get past it. It may be days, but the I'm sorry at least gets the person to, like, you've recognized your part in what just happened. And then you sort of have to feel out whether, like, we can have that conversation 10 minutes later or 10 days later or whatever it's going to look like. But just sort of being okay with that piece of it. And maybe it's not a quick resolution, because that's another thing we all want as human beings,
Ha ha.
quick resolution, right? And you may not get it right away. I mean, part of this, and you all talked about it earlier, is the being uncomfortable a little bit, right? When you are not overcoming bias, when you're falling prey to it, because a lot of bias is what you're familiar with, who you're familiar with. So you're really comfortable with certain people that are similar to you and all of these things. And sometimes what we say is, go with it. If you're feeling a little uncomfortable, you're probably doing the right thing, right? Like, you're going in the right direction, because it's like, oh, it's pushing you. When you're challenged in a way, whatever that looks like, it's growth mindset, kind of. You're pushing yourself and sort of growing in that space. So
I want
Feel like
to
I'm breathing fresh air. Go ahead,
what
Jennifer. Sorry.
sorry, Brandon, we had a question online, and I've actually heard this question come up in similar topics when you get into the topic of I'm sorry. There are a lot of leaders and spiritual leaders and teachers and global thought leaders who say, never say I am sorry, because if you're following, like, I am is one of the most powerful statements, and you don't necessarily want to say I am sorry. Does it really matter if there's a difference between saying I'm sorry versus I apologize, and then be specific about how it was you might have caused harm? Can you just illuminate anything about that?
yeah, I mean, I get that sort of that discussion and sort of nuance to it, and I think, there's definitely room for debate on there. I really do sort of lean into I'm sorry, I apologize too. I tend to just end it, because I feel like the moment you start to try to get into a little bit of the explanation is, again, where it will sort of, again, human nature, focus back on you a little bit, because you're going to want to say, I'm sorry I did this because, right? And then go into the whole explanation. So, again, if it's what's comfortable to a certain degree, but I will challenge people a little bit to push to end it. I'm very long-winded, so I have to really consciously in my mind, and I do it with my own life partner, and just sort of end it. Like, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, like, just, and just let it land so the person has their opportunity to sort of recover from it. But I get the, like, nuance in terms of just, tone and intent and that sort of meaning behind it. So I love that conversation, and it will cause me to think a little bit too about, how you can sort of navigate and maybe have different approaches and different sort of phrases that you use, how that could land differently on people. So thank you for whoever raised that.
Yeah, thank you to Rev Red. She had brought that up online.
Jennifer, one of the things I love about you is you're always in growth mindset, which Catrice talked about. And I do think growth mindset, I think is why you're so fulfilled, because I think an unfulfilled person is just someone who's stagnant. And fulfilled people are people who are in growth mindset. And I think the reason we don't is to Catrice's beautiful point, which is because we don't want to do the uncomfortableness or the ickiness. And Jennifer, something I admire and respect about you, and I'd love for you maybe to talk about that or in this discussion around the ickiness of growth, or the why it's gnarly, because I think you do it so well.
Well, the first thing, thank you. I received that. I do. And I'm very grateful that one of my teachers long ago said, if you're not expanding, you're contracting. And I was actually just reading Stephen Hawking's book this week about how they used to think the universe was stagnant, and they didn't realize that the universe is actually this ever expanding thing going out. I forget how many millions of miles per second or whatever it is. I'm not a scientist, so forgive me for that. But what occurred to me, Brandon, and what you just shared is that it's only icky if we say it is. For me, when I look at the end of every day, I'm like, where did I grow? What did I push myself to do or not do? And it's kind of like riding a wave. If anybody out there has ever been surfing, you could consider riding a wave to be really scary. Where I'm living in Portugal, there are, to be clear, the tallest waves in the world, 80-foot waves. These people have to get dropped in via jet ski, which, by the way, some of the work we're talking about doing right now, it is like you're being dropped in, on an 80-foot wave above you, and you feel like you're about to be pummeled or crushed by the intensity of that wave. And you can look at that experience as, oh my God, I'm not going to survive this. Or you can look at this as, there's a wave and I can either choose to ride it or I can choose to be pummeled by it. And that is life. And so as long as you realize that we are riding this proverbial wave of life, and it feels like 100-foot tsunami some days, and you feel like you're not going to get through it, you just keep paddling and you keep trusting that if you go in the direction it's going, you're going to continue to have this expansive energy. But if you're trying to swim up over and paddle your board the top of that 100-foot wave, it's probably going to be an uphill battle. Literally, it's going to be an obstacle. And so for me, I just look at it like I'm always meditating and reflecting and just saying, okay, what's the opportunity? And what I love is just earlier today, there was a delay. How easy is it to get frustrated or pissed with a project when people don't deliver things when they're meant to be? And my default way of being is to get angry and judgmental and say, oh, this should not be this way. And instead I went within and I was like, oh, there's a lesson here. What is the lesson I'm meant to learn? And I guarantee you, if any of you ask yourselves, no matter what's going on, maybe you do say the wrong thing, maybe you cause another person hurt. To Catrice's point, don't make it about you, but in that moment, just say, hey, what was the lesson? What could I learn from this experience? Because it's not about making the mistake in the first place. That was meant to help happen for yourself and the other people to learn from it. But it's about not repeating the same mistake. And I think that's where growth is. Think of how much more fun life is when you don't repeat the same mistake over and over. You get to have new mistakes that you get to repeat. It's much more fun that way.
Catrice, thank you, Jennifer. That was eloquent, beautiful. I'll be playing with that analogy of a wave all day. I surf all the time. I just can't get up on the board, so I don't know what you call that. Is that just sitting on a board? East Coasters, I don't know. Catrice, she talked about lessons, and I don't know how else to put this. I've met toddlers that are wiser than 90-year-olds, and I've met, wise is a really special word to me. And you strike me always since we met as someone who's wise, someone who, if I'm in conversation, I am going to learn something intrinsic that I will take away. And that's held true. Lesson, though, was the word. What lessons are you helping companies learn? What lessons are you learning in this work? What are lessons that we're seeing right now that we can take away?
Well, first of all, that is a huge compliment that you just paid me. So I have to take a beat and thank you. I really appreciate that. But there's a lot of lessons, and some of them are just, one, you have a lot of the answers within your organizations, and there's a lot of good resources. There's some great people with a lot of amazing ideas and commitment and passion around all types of aspects of this work. And so they're tapping into those resources in many instances for the first time, which is okay. But then, really, letting people have the time and space to vocalize it, giving the forum to do it. So that's one of the things that I really see. And making space at the table, right? So we talk about sort of bringing in new voices and things like that. So a lot of folks are doing that and giving people, I think, opportunity that they may not have had. And this is not just from sort of a diversity, equity, and inclusion lens, but maybe it's that inclusion piece where bringing folks in that they maybe didn't tap into for, a communications marketing story project, like, oh, let's talk to the finance people and see, like, maybe they have some thoughts, or tapping into, their perspectives and folks in their area. So there's a lot of sort of cross utilization maybe that I hadn't seen for a long time. And maybe that's also, both the time that we're in, and even with the pandemic and things like that, in terms of, like, people wearing many hats. you know, and being asked to sort of leverage different tools in the toolbox. So it's just, I feel like that's one of the greatest lessons that I've seen in a very positive way, that folks that maybe weren't always asked in are being asked in into being, you know, really their voices tapped into. So.
And to that point of the diversity being at the table and the inclusion of that table, can you talk about the importance of then once they're there, that thing that we're adding into this vernacular, which is belonging? How can people make sure that when someone's there, they're not just included, but they feel like that sense of belonging in that group?
You know, that's a one I think companies, organizations are constantly sort of striving for, is that's the maybe some ways aspirational piece too. But when you kind of tap in and do almost like a survey, if you will, of employees or folks within an organization, and they can say like, oh, no, I feel comfortable speaking up here. Yeah, I get to, you know, kind of, people care about what I think, or I was able to weigh in on that. Like those are those belonging pieces where people can actually, you know, feel comfortable speaking up. And when we talked about the horns effect right in the beginning, it's also an environment where people can make mistakes, where people, or if it's not even a mistake, it's just something that you're able to throw out your idea, and it's not going to be pummeled or like you're going to be put in the corner because it wasn't the one that everyone went with, but it gives people an opportunity to innovate, really, right? So Brandon says one thing, then Jennifer, you come behind and you build on that, then Catrice says it, and then whoever else says it, right? And then we have a great thing. So it's creating that. That's where I see, if somebody has an environment or an organization has an environment where people really have that inclusion and belonging piece, people can shout out the ideas, people can work together as teams, they can really build, they can, you know, make a mistake, quickly pivot, you're nimble. You know, inclusion is also nimbleness, and all of that is, you know, is connected. So that's,
Boom.
yeah,
That's awesome.
belonging.
All right, I could do this all day. Jennifer, do you have any other questions? And we're going to let Catrice let us know where we can find her. I encourage anyone to reach out to her. She is a wealth of just not information, but just positivity. I mean, she is someone that I would introduce to anyone in the world because
Oh,
they will be better for it. Jennifer, any
thank
questions before we wrap? Sorry,
you.
Catrice, I know that was like, I wasn't letting you sit with that comment too long.
I love that. You're so right. We definitely have to have Catrice back on. I love your energy, Catrice, and your authenticity. I know that we talk about that word a lot, but you can just tell that you have an authentic, open heart. And I think that's one thing we can all learn is just how can we be open-hearted and create the sense of belonging. I remember one of the first diversity and inclusion seminars I ever went to was from this incredible speaker, Ellie Krug. I don't know if you've ever come across her, but she would do a lot of the speaker circuits that I was on, and she had a room set up of tribes of like she'd be like, okay, how do you identify yourself? And then you had a choice, but then you could also, you know, I'm American, or you could consider yourself, I'm white, I'm black, I'm here, I'm from the south, I'm from the north, wherever. But then you could start within those tribes to actually find commonalities and ways that we're actually more similar than we are different. So my last question, Catrice, would be, what advice do you have for somebody out there who maybe is struggling to feel like they're part of a tribe, and how can you connect to a tribe and have it be an inclusive tribe that allows everybody to be fully self-expressed and have a voice?
I think when you talk about authenticity, I think that is where you start to really find your tribe and your peeps, right? And when you really, you know, can get to a place, because difference is great, similarity is great. And then when you bring like what makes you you, that part, that uniqueness, when you start talking about that and feel comfortable talking about that, I think is when you start to really connect with people. And I love those conversations initially where people like, you know, you do these exercises and you have to ask people a lot of questions and you immediately think that you have nothing in common. And then about 15 minutes in, you start to realize like, oh, we both love chocolate or whatever the case may be, right? You know, so you talk about 10 minutes of all your differences, but then you start bumping up into these like similarities. And when you get really comfortable, and it took me, you know, years and I'm still evolving and on the journey, but like when you get sort of comfortable with the quirky part of you, the like, you know, whatever different aspects of yourself, and you can talk about it freely, and you're really curious about other people, I think that's when you start to sort of like bond and find your tribe. So it's just getting that sort of inner peace about like, you're kind of good. You're good. You're cool. Like you may be quirky, you might have different interests or whatever, but like I guarantee you there are people out there that like have those same quirks, have those same interests. And or if they don't, you're going to expose them to it and they might like it. Like all of that kind of like, just but sharing who you are, being genuinely curious about other people, asking lots of questions. And that's one of the things that my partner is amazing at and has taught me so much, is to be a better like question asker, like really be, you think I'd be better at it as a recovering lawyer, asking a lot of questions, but I've actually gotten better at it, something I've had to focus on. And really, that's how I bond. You really can connect with people by asking a lot of questions and being genuinely curious. So, but be like, love your unique, quirky self. I also put that out there as your bonding thing.
So true. Well, Catrice, we love you. We can talk to you for hours. Tell everybody, where can they connect with you if they want to find out about your incredible organization? Where would they go to do so?
So you can find us at rightsizemedia.com. And if you want to reach out, you can get to us through information at rightsizemedia.com or Catrice at rightsizemedia.com. So thank you both for having me here today. You've been amazing, and just keep up all of your amazing good work with all of your great guests and all the positive energy that you put out there. It's very cool to see.
Catrice, just so much love for you. Thank you for joining us, and we hope to have you on again next year.
Okay.
Thank you,
Take
Catrice.
care.
Seriously.
Happy
Thanks.
holidays.
Okay. Happy holidays.
Happy holidays. Oh man, I can tell that's my right there is electricity. I have a company where I do a lot of work with the CEO, and I've done a lot of I do what's called summits, and we'll get together and we create values. And this year was bring your weird, and I love that quirkiness. I love that she ended. Isn't it interesting that in every single, we had 5 diversity, inclusion, ally experts, so many amazing people, from Dr. Ivy to the good guys, as I like to call them, Patty, and beyond. And I think that it really is amazing at what people have really said matters most, which is bring your uniqueness. And that was last week's guest as well, was, just all over that. Mandy Bynum hit that point again and again and again. We named our show after her. Your uniqueness is your value. So I just find that interesting that in every single thing, and if you're interviewing for a job, if you want to stay in a job and you want to get that big job, bring your quirkiness and your uniqueness. Key to diversity and key to rising in your career. We do not hide who you are. Bring it forth. And the company that values that is a company that deserves you.
All right, my friend. I'm sure we have 20 takeaways, but give them to us.
We do way too many. I honestly, I stopped on this one. I hope just re-listen like 4 times, but here's what I've got. You need people in your life to hold you accountable. That's so true. I don't know why else you should marry anyone who doesn't hold you accountable or make you better. Same idea for friends. That's make sustainable long-term goals. Do the thing that is most challenging. Be a mentor. She talked about how celebrities and people in power should be men. If anyone on this call is in a position of power, please be a mentor. If you blaze a trail for someone, watch them follow it. The power of one is strong. Be aware of your impact. Intent doesn't matter that much. Impact matters. And if you mess up, just for God's sake, say you're sorry. However you want to say it, we can have a whole podcast on how you say you're sorry. The most important thing is you say you're sorry. You have answers in the org. Make space at your table. Throw away the healthiness and success of an organization is whether people feel safe expressing their ideas and throwing them out there, and whether it be heard. And Catrice, one of my favorite people on earth, and she hit my favorite word, sometimes way overused in Northern California, but innovation. If you are safe to throw out ideas, your company will innovate. Boom. And finally, be quirky, be weird. I try. Maybe I'm not weird enough.
Oh, my friend, I think we both had. This is an embracing our quirkiness show. We do us.
That's why I value our work and our partnership, my friend. I'm grateful for you. This is the end of this month. Now we're on to the next, and we're going to again start the year with the 8 to 12 things you need to know, soup to nuts, on getting your dream job. So I'm excited for next month. We got some really good guests ahead, though.
Yeah, I'm so excited. I just spoke to somebody else too. I mean, we have a plethora of guests to choose from, so we're so lucky and looking forward to our January kickoff of A to Z, everything you want to know about getting hired, resume writing, social media, networking online and in person. It's all going to come to you beginning in January. In the meantime, if you like the show, if you like anything Brandon, Catrice, myself have said, take 2 seconds and scroll to the bottom of the podcast if you're on iTunes and just give us a rating. Whatever you feel like in your heart the rating is, we accept it and receive it. And if it's critical, hey, we welcome it and we want to learn from it. So leave us your feedback and reviews on iTunes. You can join us here for the live video version on LA Talk Radio's Facebook page. Feel free to email us at getyourselfthejob@gmail.com with any comments or feedback or thoughts, or also interact with us on the Get Yourself the Job page on Facebook, or Get Yourself the Job on Instagram. We're often doing little videos and tips there too. So happy to be here with everybody. Happy holidays. Looking forward to having you come back for the month of December for all of our incredible guests. Thanks so much.
You're listening to Get Yourself the Job with Jennifer Hill and Brandon Maslan, only on LA Talk Radio.